thank you to the CCGI for having me here today, and thank you to all participants for taking the time to come on board. So I'm just going to share my screen. So as Kamala mentioned, my name is Rachel Welch-Phillips. I work at Denton's Delaney in the region, and I'm extremely passionate about ESG for many reasons, but one of which is it is simply a responsible way of doing business. ESG provides a framework for a company to do responsible business. And as a definition, I think it really is as simple as that. So let's get into the nitty-gritty, because today we are going to speak about the role of corporate secretaries specifically within a business. What makes it special? What makes it unique? What are the key attributes of that role that can help spur on an ESG journey within an organization? To do so, I'm going to provide a toolkit. And when I provide toolkits, I like to use actual tools. So I will be providing you with a flashlight, a tool belt, some duct tape, as we go through the step-by-step of what I believe can be a truly integral difference that a corporate secretary can make when a company has chosen to embark on an ESG journey. So let's get started. So first of all, ESG, what is it and why is it important? I have found in my discourse so far across the region that there are varying levels of understanding of what ESG means and what it does not mean. So I'm going to do a little bit of demystifying and debunking just to begin with, so we are all on the same page when the toolkit is brought about as to what we are discussing. So ESG. E stands for environmental, which is an organization's impact on the planet. So the environmental impact of the organization. S is for social, how an organization treats its employees and the community, be it the customers it works for or the third-party suppliers it works with. Then governance is the corporate governance practices of that company. Now, the way I like to see ESG is like a bit of a tree, where the root of the tree is governance. And the E and the S are the fruit of good governance when applied in the framework of ESG. So what is good corporate governance? So this is something that the CCGI has built its mission on, and something that I know you will have encountered on many different occasions through this organization. But for clarity, the governance aspect of ESG touches upon things like the diversity of the board and the management structure, the audit practices, i.e. is the business of the company being conducted in a transparent and verifiable manner? Executive pay and remuneration and transparency and fairness in those regards, risk management, and one that's often missed in a conversation around governance, but cybersecurity. So that includes data protection, protection of personal information, and how the business conducts its digital operations. So environmental and social, those are the fruit I've described on the tree. What do the fruit look like when conducted correctly? So the fruit are very simple. Your net impact on the environment has to be neutralized or positive. So we speak about impact, and often impact comes with a negative undertone. Oh, you're having an impact on this. And we assume it's negative, but impact can also be very positive. And part of a company's ESG journey should be with the goal of both mitigating the negative, but also creating the positive impacts, improving upon the existing state of affairs. For social, similarly, it will look like, what is my baseline interaction with the communities I deal with? Anything involving people will fall under the social element. So as you can see, all three aspects are very, very interlinked. The environmental will impact people. The governance will impact people. And of course, the pure people-based employment matters, etc., will affect people. So the underlying thread of responsible business is your impact on the environment, your impact on people, and how you are both perceived to be and actually conducting your business are what will constitute a responsible business. So why is this important? Well, in this day and age, ESG is forming part of the solution to what Kamala has described in her introduction, a time of crisis. We are in a time of climate crisis for sure. We are also, unfortunately, in a time of war. We are in a time of the consequence of these things being famine, drought, poverty, limited access to education, limited access to healthcare, etc. And the list can go on and on and on. Responsible business plays a role in alleviating the effects of crises and also assisting the globe in coming out of these crises. So ESG is not simply about is not limited by the expanse of your business. A business that conducts a successful ESG strategy will have knock-on effects in a wider community sense. So let's look at the Caribbean as a region. What are we seeing in the ESG space trending in the Caribbean? Let's make this really relevant to us here. So we're seeing, for example, the Barbados Stock Exchange, which has recently been welcomed into the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. So this is a commitment by a government and its central bank and financial functions to align with the sustainable principles of the UN Stock Exchange Initiative. We're seeing Jamaica eyeing the financial opportunities that arise from ESG investments with their special economic zones and the regulation being crafted around those. We're seeing Grenada and their first recovery and resilience program, where again, we are seeing sustainable initiatives embedded in a recovery program, so a building of resilience for the country. And in Trinidad, we see the Vision 2030, where the national development goals are being aligned with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals in order to spur the country forward in the spirit of ESG. So let's turn specifically to the importance of the corporate secretary. So I don't need to say this to you, but for clarity, let's just lay out what the key aspects of a corporate secretary role can be. And you will see throughout the toolkit that we are linking those back to the essential elements of a successful ESG strategy and the corporate secretary role in that. So key aspects of the role being access to so many stakeholders across a business, access to board level, access to operational level, access to decision makers, and access to doers. I cannot emphasize enough how instrumental that access is in the successful rollout of any form of organizational change management, but specifically to ESG, it also will play a crucial role. Compliance. Ensuring that what the company sets out to do is actually done can often be a task that will fall onto the corporate secretary's desk. Implementation of governance framework, so not simply the running of the board minutes, but ensuring that general meetings are taking place when they should take place, actions coming out of meetings are followed up on, correspondence is circulated, communication is done. Again, a lot of this is related to access and stakeholder management. Liaising between key functions. So again, being a pretty pivotal central point of communication and messaging is a real instrumental part of the corporate secretary role that will serve a greater purpose in ESG. The thorough understanding of the company's business is probably one of the biggest ones. So this might be one of those I left it the best for last scenarios. Understanding the business in its entirety is truly important to ESG because you will be able to see what possibly others who are more specialized in their roles cannot see as to what the key barriers or the key inhibitors to success are going to be, but also where the key opportunities for the business may lie. So your ability to see that because of your engagement with the wider business as a whole can be really instrumental in advising on the execution of an ESG strategy. So some of the key attributes of a corporate secretary that I will be highlighting throughout the toolkit include analytical and problem-solving approaches. Often you are approached with problems and expected to find the solutions, and your ability to do that is really instrumental in any form of change management. Management and organizational skills go without saying. Mastery of IT and systems. So again, understanding how the business does what it does from an operational standpoint, as well as from a decision-making and strategy standpoint. Understanding compliance. So when the decision has been made for the business to achieve something, what does that look like? What does compliance with the decision look like? What does accountability look like? What is required to report on that? All those things fall within a compliance regime that often fall to a corporate secretary to help manage. So again, a lot of these things that I'm pointing out, I'm not identifying as things that solely fall on a corporate secretary, but rather things that a corporate secretary may be involved in, so thereby have the ability to influence. And last, of course, is good communication skills. Key aspect of stakeholder management, rarely the ability to communicate successfully. So with that in mind, let's launch straight into the toolkit for integrating ESG into a business and the role of the corporate secretary in doing that. So the first tool I'm going to give you is the flashlight. Why? Because we are engaging in a process of switching on the right corporate cultural mindset for ESG. So one of the biggest components of ESG is stakeholder buy-in at the highest levels. The buy-in cannot remain at the highest levels, but it must start at the highest levels. There must be an authority and a mandate from above that this is how the business is going to operate, and ESG is the lens through which the operations are to be viewed. So part of that buy-in will involve scoping, a scoping exercise where the company leaders decide on what ESG looks like for that company, they acknowledge its importance, and this is then communicated to the wider business. So there are also active steps that need to be taken from the top to drive the performance in the communication that is sent around as to what the company is hoping to achieve in this space. Resource must be allocated, communication must be sent, and appropriate communication must be sent to all levels of the organization, and appropriate training must be provided to staff. One of the key areas where we used to see when I was working in Europe, where we would see faltering in an ESG strategy's execution, was that the communication was not appropriate. So what can be appropriate at board level, be it through minutes or AGM reports, may not be appropriate at an operational level, i.e., have you taken that messaging and translated it in a way that will be easily understood and easily applied by all the various levels of the organization. So shortcuts where the minutes get sent out to the staff group Outlook group may not be the most effective form of communication if you truly want your staff to engage. And the key has to always be engagement. Successful communication will bring engagement. So the focus on good governance, again, as the foundation for successful ESG performance, has to be an underlying factor that is always kept at the forefront. So any form of change management in an organization, let's leave ESG aside for a second and think about changing an IT system or switching an HSE reporting mechanism in a business. That goes through a process of organizational change, where both the system is changing, the behaviors expected are changing, and the understanding of what is being done has to change. That form of change management relies on a process of good governance, which involves communication, but also involves the appropriate rollouts of resource, of training, and then all of that needs to be coordinated. And this is where you will often see a corporate secretary very heavily involved. Coordinating the good governance of change management will be foundational to success. So specifically as to your role, what would your role in this flashlight stage of the toolkit be? Holding leadership accountable for the decisions made. So we don't want scenarios whereby the leadership make a decision, receive all the marketing and reputational benefits of launching that decision out to the public and to the press, and then no follow-on is conducted. Accountability for the decisions made, but also the actions required to execute those decisions. Ensuring measurable impact accompanies the commitment. So again, commitment can take various forms. It can include an umbrella statement of our company is dedicated to becoming a responsible business. But what's underlying that? What's making that a reality? So ensuring measurable impact, quantifiable impact, and it doesn't have to be numerical or financial, but recordable impact that can be used to hold the leadership accountable. And lastly, communication. As I stressed before, your role will be integral in ensuring that appropriate, effective communication is driving engagement of your stakeholders at all levels. So now let's hop to the next tool in the kit, which I call the tape measure. And I think it goes without saying what the tape measure is going to do. We're going to be identifying, measuring, and assessing the organization's ESG issues. Now, when I say issues, what I'm discussing here is impact, but in a negative way. The issues are the aspects of a business's operation that are resulting in negative impact from an environmental, social, and governance standpoint. Identifying those issues are key. Why? Because understanding your impact is what will drive your performance. So understanding your impact will allow you to do things later on down the line that will improve upon where you started. So this is part of what we call identifying the baseline, understanding where you are now to be able to understand where you want to go. So identifying the ESG issues is an exercise we often call issue spotting. So you use industry relevant tools such as frameworks designed for your specific industry, be it financial, be it manufacturing, whatever it may be, and using guides that will give you the things to consider. Give you the aspects to consider. Consider your carbon emissions, consider your use of resources like water, consider your output in the form of air pollution, etc. Those might fall under E. Some of those criteria are those that I threw on the first slide, but it can go much, much more into detail than that. Those are generic ones when you start looking at your industry-specific impacts. So after you identify the issues that you believe are areas where your operation is having a negative impact, you then measure that impact. You do that by conducting a bit of a materiality assessment, so to speak. So you identify what that impact is and what its knock-on effects might be. And you understand that as thoroughly as possible. This part of the process requires a significant investment of time. And again, those who understand the business best will be the best place to run it. So often corporate secretaries in alignment with leaders of business units, as well as the directors. The next step is then to assess what policies and regulations exist to address these now. So again, this is part of understanding the baseline. What do we do now that should be improving on this? What policies do we have in place? And conducting an assessment as to whether those are working. Have we been seeing improvement? Have we been seeing responsiveness? Have we been seeing engagement with what this policy or this regulation is hoping to achieve? If not, then there needs to be a consideration of whether that policy is fit for purpose. So your role in this process, your role in the tape measuring process, look around at what peers and competitors are doing. This could be both regionally and abroad, because a lot of times the industry standard can be gleaned without you having to make the mistakes that others have first made. Identify gaps and needs that you have based on what you are seeing, both in the internationally accepted frameworks, but also in and amongst the publications of your peers. You also need to have a solid understanding of the E, the S, and the G criteria and issues that arise for your specific industry and your business. Again, these are not going to be the same across the board, but it is very important that you get a comprehensive view of what your industry's impact can be in relation to E, S, and G. You then want to identify what data already exists in your organization and what further data is required to assess the impact of the issues that you've identified. Now, again, these are not responsibilities that I am arguing should fall solely on a corporate secretary. Rather, an understanding of this process will often involve someone in a corporate secretarial role having involvement in asking these questions. A lot of this is going to be a matter of asking the right questions to the right people within your business in order to spur this forward. So let's move on to the next tool, which is the duct tape. So this is putting it all together. What you've gleaned from your baseline is an understanding of issues that you've identified and the impact that they are having and what you currently have in place and whether or not it's working. So that's what we just discussed. Now with the duct tape, you need to bring that all together to start being solution oriented. The duct tape needs to bring that information together in order to create answers. So you're going to assess the materiality of these issues in order to determine priorities. Where are we making the most negative impact? That needs to be the priority for the business from a resource perspective, from a time perspective, and from a commitment perspective. Then solutions need to be developed to minimize, mitigate, or eliminate. And depending on the issue, it could be one of those, it could be all of those over a chronological period. Again, this will all be very specific to the issue and to your industry. But you want to develop solutions that address, in one of those ways, the negative impact that's arising. The next thing is to bring together the relevant people to develop and agree a strategy for addressing. So this strategy will include resource allocation. It will include a step-by-step form of change management, but the important thing is to bring together all those who will be affected by this change. Now, with something like ESG, which involves putting a lens over your whole operation in order to understand your impact and improve on it, you're going to need your board. You're going to need the heads of your operational units. And in certain instances, you're going to need third parties who you rely on for things like IT provision or procurement, because anybody involved in the running of a key aspect of your business and its operation needs to be at that table. So what's your role in this as a corporate secretary? Well, incorporating the strategic planning into how the organization does business and not leaving it at a boardroom level and not shoving it into a department in HR as woefully occurred with CSR in many instances. Your role is to ensure that ESG and its strategic planning sits across the business, sits across the decisions that are made. And you need to ensure that these are embedded. So not a one-off, oh, we did this project, but is it an aspect of how we do everything that we do? have these considerations been made? This is a systemic approach. So as I discussed, this is a form of organizational change management. You are integrating a system into your business, similar to an IT system or a new way of working in any other aspect. ESG should not be compartmentalized or departmentalized. It is supposed to be across the organization, and it's supposed to be implemented systemically. And why I use the word systemic is that systems allow for multiple things. One, systems allow for feedback, right? If a system is not working, you get notified. So having a system in place involves putting feedback loops in place so that you can continually improve and assess on performance. It also allows you to identify and assess what's working and what's not working on an ongoing basis. It can allow you to have a track of whether you're reaching your targets, whether you're likely to, and it can allow you to constantly feed inputs in or remove aspects of what may not be working. So the last thing is, of course, ensuring that the ESG strategy is considered in all boardroom decisions. So again, the corporate secretary having that seat. I see it a bit like how it was put by one of those characters in the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. If you all have seen that movie, you may remember the phrase, "The man is the head, but the woman is the neck, who turns the head in whichever way she wishes." Well, I'm saying here that the corporate secretary can be the neck that can turn the boardroom in the direction it should be looking. And ensuring that the ESG strategy is considered in boardroom decisions is a big area where we've seen a lot of clients fall down. ESG often gets its own dedicated meeting where we talk about ESG here, and then in all the other stuff, we don't talk about ESG, right? Because we've discussed it already. No, ESG, I would argue against developing an ESG meeting. ESG should not have its own meeting. ESG should be an essential component of consideration right before your AOB on the agenda. Have we considered how ESG, the lens of ESG, over all these decisions we've spoken about today? Have we considered the ESG impact of everything we've discussed in this meeting today? Should always happen before any other business or the meeting closes, right? Integrating the ESG consideration into the boardroom at all levels is absolutely instrumental to the success of an ESG strategy. Why? The ESG strategy really needs to be seen like a journey, not a destination. It's probably impossible for a company to be the most responsible business it could possibly be, bar none, right? There's always improvement that can be made. There's always progress to be had. So ESG should be viewed as a way of working, not an isolated thing to do. Okay, so moving on in our toolkit, we're going to move to what I call the tool belt. Now, if anybody does a little DIY, and I can't include myself in this, I'm not big on the DIY, but when my husband is doing DIY around the house, I see him put on a tool belt. Why? Because it keeps his tools close and accessible. So what am I going to explain keeps the tools close and accessible in an ESG strategy? An ESG management system. So let's go back to what I originally discussed as the importance of this system and speak a little bit more about this ongoing management and assessment. So the tool belt. A management system allows for the assessment of risk, analysis of performance, and implementation of improvements. So a system must be built that allows for those things to happen on an ongoing basis. It could be periodically, like quarterly, it could be monthly, depending how your business is already structured. This is often already done, simply not for these criteria. But you'll see businesses have these things in place for health and safety incidents at work, for example. Or they'll have these incidents in place for the performance of their third-party IT provider, recording incidents as they take place and analyzing their performance in terms of responsiveness. When an issue arises, how quickly do they fix it? None of this should be too foreign to an organization because these types of systems are already in place. Now, what I've encountered is that a lot of people run away from the concept of having to build a system because it sounds really expensive and burdensome. But I'm going to argue that in most organizations, an ESG management system is already built. You just need to look at the right things. So using existing systems of how companies collect data, assess the performance of their operation, ESG can simply be baked into that existing system. You just start looking for additional things. How is this going? How's that going? How's this going in the same existing system? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Setting targets and KPIs is another key component of a management system because it allows for progress to be both systematically implemented and measured. So what will get chugged out of the system is whether or not it's working. And that is important because it allows for continual assessment. It also allows for measurable outcomes. Now, I use the term measurable fairly lightly because people often say, well, how am I measuring good governance, so on and so forth? Well, you can determine that, and there are frameworks to assist you in determining what would be the most appropriate way of measuring governance in your organization. But it doesn't have to be financial, and it doesn't have to be numerical. Right? You can have measurable outcomes that are based on, for example, a qualitative assessment. For example, you can send a survey out to your staff on employee satisfaction, right? That gives you a measurable outcome, even though it's based on qualitative data and often subjective data. You also want to regularly review and benchmark efforts against your targets. So again, you are constantly saying, are we doing what we intended, and are we doing enough? Could we do more? Is this, how can we shift and change what we're doing for maximum positive impact, right? We've taken an issue that we've recognized we are having an adverse impact on either the environment, the community, or all of the above. And now we are saying, are we doing all that we can do within the capabilities of our organization's operations to mitigate, minimize, or eliminate that impact? That has to be the question asked at the end of the management system process. So here's the system, here's what we're collecting, here's what it's telling us. Now, are we doing enough? So your role in this, as with any form of change management, would be to help roll it out. Again, communication being key, bringing the right stakeholders to the table being key, and understanding what compliance looks like being key. Data needs to be collected, and again, not saying that this should be your job, rather communicating with the right people as to the collection of data, ensuring that an auditor is brought on board where appropriate to verify the data for transparency, accuracy, and accountability. And then making interventions for changes as needed. So this ongoing process that a management system allows you to do, then allows you to consistently improve and address. And this isn't just improving and addressing on the positive impact you're having. It could also be improvement in cost efficiency. For example, too much money is being dedicated to something that's not producing the impact we had hoped. Let's reallocate that money to something that will, right? So efficiencies along the way, all of that can come in the form of recommendations that are made to a board based on the information being chugged out of this ESG management system. So there's one more tool in the tool belt, to go in the tool belt, very instrumentally. And it's one I really enjoy. It's the megaphone, communication. So sharing information on what progress is being made, what performance is looking like, what the vision and values are of the strategy with both internal and external stakeholders, regulatory bodies, customers, third parties, anyone who the organization deems relevant to communicate to. The sharing of that information is absolutely key. You cannot expect something from somebody if you do not communicate your expectations. Identifying suitable reporting is also very key at an early stage, because people often think, oh, well, reporting is what you do right at the end. Yes, but you need to understand what goes into that reporting. What are the inputs? And you need to ensure that you build a system that gives you the inputs you need to produce the output in the form of the desirable report. And again, they are internationally accepted standards of reporting that you can subscribe to that give you the criteria and help you build a management system that then produces the outputs that their framework requires for reporting. So not a lot of reinventing the wheel required. Often it's just getting the right ESG consultants and service providers on board to help direct you to the answers that are already very much here. No one is saying you have to sit down and build something from zero. Most of it is here. So then ensuring reporting is regular, consistent, and transparent. And again, using the correct framework for reporting will often have this baked in. There will be requirements for verifying information. There will be requirements for transparent formats of reporting. And there will be requirements for time periods and chronological time periods in which reporting must occur. So what's your role on this? Well, ensuring that the key messages on ESG are communicated appropriately across the organization, keeping leadership accountable for ESG progress, and verifying that the data that is provided and reported is correct. Again, absolutely instrumental. And let's jump straight into why this aspect cannot be understated. the stumbling blocks. What are some of the key stumbling blocks we've seen where companies fall over in their ESG strategies, and what can you as corporate secretaries do to help prevent that? First of all, greenwashing. Marketing the good, omitting the bad, or claiming that you are doing something that you're not in fact doing. There is a flood of litigation taking place across North America and Europe accusing companies of just this, claiming something is sustainable or environmentally friendly, and it's not. So this concept of greenwashing is one that you have to be very, very careful about. A problem companies often have in facing ESG is that they view it as a marketing opportunity as opposed to a way of work. So they are communicating things that, let's say a board level commitment is made and communications get sent out left, right, and center. We are now sustainable, we are now green, right? But the actual work has not been done. And in the Caribbean, we are not as litigious as North America. And I think that's managed to save some of our companies from what would have been a very expensive process had they been in a jurisdiction where civil society is more litigious, because you're seeing it in North America, left, right, and center. If you cannot back up that assertion, we're taking you to court. Backing it up requires what? Data, evidence. What is that court going to want to see in order to say that the greenwashing allegation is false? They're going to want to see proof of what you've claimed you've done or what you claim you are doing. So reportable, verifiable data baked into a management system can be a form of future-proofing your organization and protecting your organization from allegations. Reporting and due diligence, again, baked in to a good management system is accurate and accountable data gathering. So again, your data, as a lot of data scientists can tell you, the same piece of data can be used to say very contradictory things, right? So understanding the limitations on your data, the limitations on the messaging that data allows you to provide, and ensuring that the data is being used for verifiable and accountable purposes is very, very important. You don't want to be accused of mixed messaging or of false messaging. Sidelining governance. So this is one where, again, ESG begins to get compartmentalized into sort of a subsector of HR, sort of like CSR was, or it gets a dedicated meeting of its own and then we forget about it. That's where the governance components is so key. The continuity of good governance and the accountability of good governance is very instrumental. Understanding that good governance is not simply a nice to have, it is a way of managing your company's risk. So good governance is aligned with reducing company risk. Why? Because a company that reflects good governance and is well managed and transparently managed and accountable for the actions that are being taken and the decisions that are being made are companies that will meet their compliance requirements with much more ease, and they will be more successful and their business will be more fruitful. Cybersecurity, again, this is one that people often overlook, but recently, I don't know if any of you read on the news, British Airways had a cybersecurity, well, they've experienced a multitude of data breaches over the past 5 years, and this has started affecting things like their credit rating. This affects both public perception, but also their financial prospects. Recently here in Trinidad and Tobago, we had a cybersecurity issue arise within a large retailer that affected customers' ability to access the service, but also made everyone question, well, was my data stolen? These are companies that hold financial and personal data on individuals. Where's my data now? Cybersecurity can really undermine this concept of good governance. Cybersecurity is very, very important, and investing in cybersecurity and ensuring that information held is protected cannot be understated. And lastly, ongoing compliance and accountability. As we say in Trinidad, people like to start hot and sweaty on day one, right? Oh yes, we have this ESG strategy and we love it and we're passionate and we're here and we're there. And a year from then, you ask the same questions. Oh yes, how's that strategy going? Yeah, it's fine, it's okay. It's there. Keeping that energy high is a challenge, right? With anybody on any aspect. But with ESG, it's very important that you bake the requirements into a system that does not rely on board energy, right? It does not rely on the directors feeling passionate that day. It relies on a system that was built, right, by said passionate people, right, and can produce the result on an ongoing basis without the need for there to be individual levels of commitment past that stage. Once the commitment stage has been made, the EMS will run with it. The ESG management system will run with that, and those commitments will constantly be deployed in the organization. Why? Because the compliance and accountability on an ongoing basis is what will render success. 3-month and 6-month periods of compliance and accountability will not get a business very far, and again, can raise risk in terms of allegations such as greenwashing. So it's something to be very, very careful about. So lastly, just to touch on how we can help. So legal service providers, consultants, third parties who are ESG specialists can help your organization in the following ways that I've put up on the slide. I won't go through chapter and verse on each one, but really integrating into your process a true understanding of what ESG is and what this rollout must look like can make or break it. So again, you don't have to go at it alone. There are those who specialize in it. There are those who can help with it. And asking the right questions can often be the right start. So with that in mind, thank you all very much, and I am open to questions.
Thank you very much, Rachel. What an absolutely incredible presentation. And at the speed at which you delivered it as well, I was myself trying to speed up to keep on top and take notes. So I absolutely love these 5 tools that you introduced us to: the flashlight, the tape measure, the duct tape, the tool belt, and the megaphone, you know. And then how you brought it all together by saying, so these are the things we need to do, but also identified some of those stumbling blocks. The greenwashing we are all familiar with now, but I really like how you spoke about being able to ensure that there's verifiable data, you know, and how that was woven into the entire process from the beginning, so that it doesn't become something at the end that you now say, oh, well, we need to demonstrate that this is what we're actually doing. You build it into the process. So that's awesome. And I love how you ended too with that they should continue with the passion with which they began this commitment, because that is very true. A lot of times we lose steam as we go along. And yes, I think that corporate secretaries here would have really appreciated how you linked what their role will be and how they can help ensure that the boardroom focuses on these issues. I'm not sure how many may agree with there being the neck. Maybe there are. I'd be very happy to hear from some of the corporate secretaries if they think that they're able to have that level of influence in the boardroom and guiding some of the discussions. But also for me to end specifically here and then to invite comments and questions from everyone as well, which is to say that ESG should never be a separate meeting. I truly appreciated that at the end of the board meeting, there need to now be a review of, have we incorporated the ESG elements to understand the impact of what we are doing on a daily basis with what's happening. So that I really thought that this was an excellent presentation, and I'm seeing that is reflected in the many comments in our chat. So okay, so there's a question also, would you be making the slides available for the participants, Rachel?
Yes, I'm very happy to. What I'll do is I'll send them to Kamala following the presentation and she can circulate.
Okay, excellent. And as we told everyone, these sessions are recorded and the recordings are sent to you afterwards. So we would also, we'll send the slides along with the recordings tomorrow. So Liz from Guyana is saying it's a mind-blowing presentation. Helen said it was very engaging. Saskia said fantastic presentation. So too did Michelle from Barbados. Professor Garrett has said, well done, Rachel. Clear, concise, and implementable. Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with that. So I want to ask persons, I know that you all would have been really blown away by this. So I see a question, one from Avia. Well, actually, no, that's a comment. She said she loved the integrated approach recommended for ESG implementation. I want to ask Mohini if she would be willing to unmute and ask the question that she has on the chat, or would she like me to read it out for her? Mohini?
Thank you, Kamla.
Yes.
Rachel, that was an excellent presentation.
Thank
I
you.
must commend you.
Thank you.
The question as to whether corporate secretaries have that level of impact in the boardroom, in my belief, and this is just my belief, is that it depends on something we spoke on yesterday, and that is recruitment and selection. It depends on the level of the directors. It depends on who the directors are within that boardroom, and it also depends on the sector. Private sector may, I am absolutely sure, will differ from the public sector in terms of how they approach ESG within the company. And public sector definitely is going to be different because ultimately each one of the sectors and the industry within which they operate is driven by a different purpose altogether, individually as they are. So for me, can we have that impact? I am thinking that it depends on which one of the sectors we are in, and more so coming down as to which one of the industries within that sector we fit in. I'm from the maritime industry, and I can tell you, and more so in the public sector of the maritime industry. So I can tell you that is very, very difficult for me from where I sit.
I understand that. And thank you for that question. It is extremely valid and important. So it is important to remember that ESG will sit in the politics of an organization as it exists, right? It still is existing within the intricacies of how anything gets done within an organization. And I completely agree with you that public and private sector considerations can be very different. What I would say in terms of the role of the corporate secretary is that, you know, the deployment of the ESG strategy is where your role can be instrumental, but the influence that you have need not be a declaration in a board meeting. You know, sometimes the corporate secretary simply knows how to pick their allies the best. Why? Because they are in so many different spaces and understand who has influence, what they need to hear, what motivates that individual, what would incentivize that individual, what opportunities can I have access to and provide to them in order to give them the incentive they need to roll this out. Or, you know, who do I need to speak to? And it may not be that you are doing the speaking yourself on a board level, but it may be that you are having the conversations with people who you know are engaging with the subject. And really and truly, a lot of this toolkit is premised for organizations that have already accepted that ESG is going to be part of how they do what they do. So it is very, very difficult for you to roll this out in isolation. And I'm not going to say that that is what I'm advocating either, because it sounds like a death trap. But I would say that where an organization at board level is making a commitment to ESG, this is where the toolkit can be deployed. But if your organization is not yet at the stage where your board level is having these conversations, they can still be raised. You know, in understanding who you can speak to, who you might think would be an ally in this space, or just testing the waters with several people to say, hey, have we been considering ESG as a form of doing business? Do we understand? Would you like some assistance in that regard? I know some consultants who can come in and speak with you. I know some lawyers. I know this, I know that. Can I offer you this assistance? I believe this is important because it reflects the values of our business. It reflects how we want to impact the world we work in. It affects how we impact the people we work with. And it is extremely important. I have to say, in a maritime-based industry, it is extremely important that there be a discussion about your environmental impact. So really and truly getting that buy-in and getting that leadership dedication and commitment is really, it is really the step that prefaces the deployment of a toolkit like this. You really need to have the commitment at that level. It can't still be a discussion as to whether we care at the board level for this to work.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. And Mohini has said that she's taken away from this, especially pick the right allies. Okay, so I see Camille's hand is up. So I'm going to invite Camille to ask her question just now. And I'm going to let Misha Loban-Clark know that we are coming to her next with her question. So if you guys want to put on your videos in order to ask your question, that'd be fine as well. Christy is here to include you in the panel as well, so that you can ask your question. Okay, so Camille, I'm coming to you now because I saw your hand was raised a while ago.
Yes, so thanks, Kamala. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon, actually, colleagues, first in Trinidad. I really wanted to respond in relation to the specific question Mohini raised about the influence of corporate secretaries in the boardroom. I think it has a lot to do with organizations really changing their perception of what corporate secretaries are. I think in the past, corporate secretaries were seen as note takers, as people who service board meetings, as, you know, just there to take the minutes and produce the minutes and, you know, do the resolutions and really a secretary to a board. But I think organizations have to understand there is an evolving role of corporate secretaries. Corporate secretaries are corporate governance professionals. You know, interestingly, I saw a job description for an organization recently that was passed through me, and it was actually drafted as though it's a traditional role of the corporate secretary. And we have seen a lot of our colleagues, even in the legal profession, because you're a lawyer, they assume you could do corporate secretary work. They assume put you as a corporate secretary because you're a lawyer, and you probably understand compliance, but corporate secretaries' rules are not about just compliance. It's about really driving the corporate governance practices of the organization. So I wanted to say that having that influence really has to do with organizations being mature and transitioning to understanding that the role of the corporate secretary is more than note-taking and servicing meetings and just putting your young lawyer into the boardroom to take notes. It's about driving decision-making, ensuring compliance, yes, but influencing decision-making. And I like you, Rachel, you made a very important point. A lot of organizations, ESG is not new to the organization. It's already incorporated as part of mature organizations. And even management structures already there. You know, you have robust risk assessment processes in place. You already implement action plans to mitigate risk. You're already looking at OSH compliance. You're already looking at regulatory compliance. You're already reporting to the board on those things. So it may not be coined as ESG in some organizations, but they are doing it. I think it's structuring it into that conversation that it's ESG that's being done. I note the point about greenwashing. We do have organizations that greenwash because, especially in an organization like mine, UB, where grants and stuff, I'm not saying UB greenwashes, by the way.
All right.
I'm just saying in the context of reputational, international reputational risk, and when you're going out for grant funding, you know, you want to have, you tick the boxes. And when you tick the boxes, people say you have a policy, but a policy is just a policy. You have to be able to operationalize and implement your policy and show that it's permeating your organization. So I just wanted to say those are important. ESG does exist in some organizations.
Thank you very much, Camille. Yes, I appreciate that very much. Okay, so I want to invite Misha now if she wants to ask a question, or would she like me? Oh yes, then we have Misha. Come, Misha, let's hear your question.
Yes, I think Camille kind of said a little bit to answer, but Rachel, again, I also have to say an excellent presentation, and I in fact share your passion about ESG. But my question is, I find that the companies that are really advancing, and you echoed it, are those who may be internationally based or mature companies who know, you know, who are able to integrate. But we still need, I think we have still a far way to go. And I wanted to ask you, how do you think we could get companies across the region to really buy in, and not just to say that they are putting a policy in place to tick a box, as Camille mentioned, but that they're held to accountability. And I ask that question because, you know, the accountancy profession, they have standards, international accounting standards or financial reporting standards that holds them accountable. But we do not have that because ESG remains a relatively new concept. And I wanted to ask you, you know, how do people like us who are passionate about it, not just those who are corporate secretaries, but who can influence companies, how can we get that momentum happening across the Caribbean?
Right.
Thank you, Kamala.
Sure.
Thank you for that question, Misha. That is an extremely important one. So there are several ways a company is incentivized, only one of which is regulation. So regulatory compliance is one way to get a company to do something, and it is behavior that I would hope to be seeing very soon in the region more on the regulatory side of things, requiring certain disclosures. So requiring that the companies reveal their impact in certain spaces. We are starting to see that being discussed in this region, so I do not believe it is far away. However, regulation is one form of incentivization. There are real financial opportunities that come with deploying an ESG strategy. Access to new financing, often cheaper because it is often supported by the likes of development banks and others who are willing to throw money at no return to the sustainable development of nations. You are starting to see financial opportunities in the form of partnerships, companies that are willing to partner with you regionally, nationally, internationally, to further your goals because you share their values, one of which is ESG. And remember, other jurisdictions that have these regulatory environments already, such as in North America and Europe, they have requirements that say, we can't work with a third party if they're willfully polluting. We can't work with a third party if they do not have a governance structure in place that's transparent and accountable. We can't work with third parties who don't have anti-bribery and corruption policies that are enforceable in place. You know, all these things start appearing and limit your opportunities as a business to grow and to be sustained. And any business that is not motivated by its own future proofing is a business that is likely not to exist in that future, right? You have to always be looking ahead at what is required for your business, not only to continue to exist, but to actually thrive. And the last thing I would say, baked into ESG is a lot of cost savings. If you start measuring how much energy you're using and you start measuring how much resource you're deploying and how much natural resource you're using in your business and find ways for efficiencies that might be an upfront cost that starts saving you money 2 years from now, but will save you money for the next 20, you are actually, again, financially future-proofing your business. So depending on the business and what incentivizes the business and where the cost savings could lie in ESG and where the opportunities could lie in ESG, there's a strong financial argument to be made to convince a company that it's worth starting putting these things in place, particularly when it comes to growth, right? Because the new normal is going to be companies need to be alive to these issues. Companies need to be proactively engaging with issue spotting in ESG, with addressing those issues and with having a strategy in place. So it may be that in the Caribbean, we have not seen the same fervor and speed of acceleration of deployment as we've seen elsewhere, but in this globalized world, it is not going to take long.
Mm-hmm. Good. And we are just at 12:30, Rachel. This was such an absolutely brilliant presentation. I want to just ask you to share your closing thoughts with us. I know you mentioned earlier that the Barbados Stock Exchange, as an example, recently was welcomed into the UN Stock Exchange initiatives. Jamaica, Grenada, you spoke about their sustainability initiatives embedded in recovery efforts, and Trinidad and Tobago also having alignment with the 2030 goals, you know. So as an overview, what are some of the takeaways you'd want us to have in terms of how we should be looking at addressing these things too?
Okay, I think the first thing I would just say is that ESG excludes no one. There is no one who is most suited to ESG or best suited to ESG. ESG can be deployed and tailored to your organization, its specific needs, and the impacts that you are having, both big and small. Again, it is not a matter of, oh, we let the multinationals do it and we sit down and hold on and we're not really making an impact. No, everybody's making an impact, be it through the targets that you're setting, the message that you're sending, the impacts that you're having through this communication and through this deployment, or simply contributing to the wider discourse. Being here now and dedicating time and energy to further understanding ESG and what it might mean for your company in this region is key. It's instrumental, and these conversations need to happen more. So as a takeaway, I want to challenge each and every one of you to identify one decision maker in your business who you can share this toolkit with. The PDF will be circulated to you shortly. Share it with someone and discuss it. Send it to them maybe in an Outlook invite where you put aside an hour for lunch with them, and you can talk through what you've learned here and what you think is most applicable to your business, and just begin having the conversation. There is a real strong moral impetus to this. So it's very rare for leaders to say, ESG, we don't care about that. No, they have to care about it, right? Because they're saying then that they don't care about their people, they don't care about the environment, and they are blind to good governance. And nobody's going to say that. So put people on the spot. Put them on the spot and challenge them. Why do we not have an ESG policy? Why do we not have an ESG strategy? Have you identified this opportunity that we could exploit if we did? Have you identified all these cost savings that we could achieve if we did? Present it as an opportunity, not a cost, not a burden, but a way to ensure that the business will continue to thrive and exist in the future. That is literally the definition of sustainability. Thank you all.